Hi, I'm Rich Ribeiro. The TURRELL Fund is committed to educating the public about the need to support New Jersey's infants and toddlers right from the start. That's why we're proud to support the important early childhood programming produced by the CAUCUS Educational Corporation.
Funding for this edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been provided by the TURRELL Fund, a foundation serving children. The Nicholson Foundation, changing systems, changing lives by advancing health and early childhood in New Jersey. The PNC Foundation, which supports early childhood education through Grow Up Great, a multi-year initiative to help prepare children from birth to age 5 for success in school and life. RWJ Barnabas Health, the New Jersey Education Association, the Northward Center, and by NJ Best, New Jersey's 529 College Savings Plan. Turn a dream into a degree.
This is One-on-One. I'm an equal American just like you are.
The jobs of tomorrow are not the jobs of yesterday.
Look at this. You got this?
Here it is, man. Look at that.
Life without dance is boring.
I don't care how good you are or how good you think you are, there is always something to learn.
Do you enjoy talking politics?
No.
People call me because they feel nobody's paying attention.
Our culture, I don't think, has ever been tested the way it's being tested right now.
Such a good question. High five.
Hi, I'm Steve Adubato. More importantly, this is Right from the Start NJ, an ongoing series of programs, but it's so much more than that. It's a campaign, it's an initiative to talk about the things that affect infants and toddlers and also prenatal care as well. Infants, toddlers, birth to 3, everyone's responsibility. There'll be Right from the Start NJ website that's up constantly. Go on that site, get valuable information. It makes a difference. So the panel that we've been talking to, we're going to get right back into is Jennifer Santana. When we left this last conversation from Right from the Start, I wanted to get into the economics of this, okay? But before I do economics of childcare, who's paying for it? How much should we be paying as a society, as a state, as a federal government? But Doctor, you mentioned something I want to get into, and it's important for everyone. You talked about having to do with parents and their responsibility and their role as it relates to vocabulary building. I can say that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's correct. I mean, as I said before, children start to say words usually at a year of age. By 2 years, they're saying 50 words. And you already heard about the gap between the children of affluent parents and those that aren't. But there's a program called Reach Out and Read that was...
Reach Out and Read. Yeah. It'll be on our website Right from the Start NJ. Go ahead.
Yeah. It was established over 30 years ago out by a pediatrician out of Boston. And he made a determination that if you start to read to children at the age of 6 months, and when you go for your regular visit, you get a book, and it's language specific, that you can eliminate the disparity in terms of the vocabulary of children that are poor versus children that are affluent. And what it takes is reading on a regular basis to your children. And anyone can do that.
Anyone. So you're saying, look, there are certain socioeconomic factors that impact the ability of a parent or both parents to pay, right, for quality child care, but there's no limitation to the ability to read?
I think that that's exactly correct. And right now, they've sort of amplified it.
I've seen a reaction. Yeah. Joe, then I'll come back to you. Caitlin, go ahead. Joe, go.
Well, I mean, there are limitations if parents of that child have limited education background themselves, if they have 3 jobs, if they have limited English, things of that sort. So I think the 2 things that, that we're talking about here are the type of attention that child is getting in the center and that center engaging with the parent to bring that parent along so that that parent knows how to engage with the child at home. Those 2 things are critical.
You mean teaching parents to be better parents?
Sure, parenting education is critical. I mean, I think for everybody, not just for impoverished parents,
but where do we go for this? So say someone goes on our website Right from the Start NJ, like what? Go here you're shaking your head to learn to be a better parent, Caitlin?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Break it down.
Well, because we go to class to learn how to drive a car. We don't go to class to learn how to be a parent. It just shows up.
And then
yes, and I think also it's thought of as a skill to be taught, and it's a relationship to be grown into over time. There are definitely places you can go to get new information about how to be a parent, but this is a relationship that you engage with. And sometimes what happens is that when you go learn all this information that you can find online, it starts to overwhelm families if they have access to that. At the end of the day, your relationship with your child is actually the thing that's the best teacher.
I appreciate that, but let me play devil's advocate. So a parent is, or both, working a job, if they're fortunate enough to have a job, potentially working more than one job. The doctor triggered something here, because I'm thinking to myself, what about the parents who say, I'm working, I'm hustling, I don't even like my job, but I'm staying at my job because I need the benefits and whatever it is, and they are stressed. They're at their wit's end. And then read at night. So I think the doctor's saying, yeah, that's right. But you have a responsibility to do those things, because if you don't, there'll be a price to pay for that child. I believe that's what you're saying. But what about for those parents who are saying, I can't do it? Beverly.
So we ask parents to look at their schedule and just make some very small periods of time available.
Break it down, some examples.
So if you're working to 6 or 7 o'clock at night and you come home, you have to prepare dinner for your family. While you're preparing dinner or some time right after dinner, take 15 minutes and read a book to the child before they go to bed. I mean, that's very easy to do. It doesn't take a long period of time. I'm more concerned, though, about cell phones. I just want to bring that into the conversation because I see parents with their children now. The parent is on the cell phone, and there's very little interaction between the
parents on the cell phone. Well, let's stay on this.
Mm-hmm.
As I said in our first segment, our daughter Olivia, who is 7 and happens to be with me at work today, and I will tell you, I know she's engaged and involved for a couple of reasons. And one of them, she likes to read, she likes to write. But the other thing is, I know she has her iPad. And I know she's watching My Little Pony. And I know this morning, as we were getting ready to come here, she was watching My Little Pony. And I was saying, she's been doing that for a while. Question, how much screen time, right, practical advice for parents, I know it's easier for us when our child, and she happens to be 7, but talk about even younger, you know, birth to 3. If he or she is engaged and involved, Joanna, when do you call a timeout and say, no?
I think it's so important.
Because it is easier, isn't it?
Well, it's so much easier to put the kid in front of the TV, hand them your phone, and what we know now about cell phones is they actually release dopamine in the brain that's similar to the way a brain responds on cocaine. So there are similar reactions in the brain for a child on a cell phone as there are for an adult on drugs. So the impact is very, very real. And as a parent, you do have to say, I'm sorry, but no. No is a hard thing when you could be doing something you need to be doing around the house. If you're bringing your child with you to work and you need to keep them quiet, whatever the situation, yeah, it's easier. But as parents, we do have to say no. And
stay on that, Doctor. Yeah. Is Joanna right about that?
Yeah.
I was hoping she wasn't, but she is.
15 years ago, I talked to you about this on weekends.
You've been with us for over 20 years, and I asked, have I gotten any better at this? And what did he say off camera? He goes, yes, but your temperament is still the same. And that was not a compliment. I just want to clarify that. Go ahead, what were you saying?
But I think, you know, the issue is it's extremely easy for parents to keep their kids quiet.
Yes.
By giving them some kind of electronic device. And what the children need and want is parental attention. And it's not attention that ought to be divided between a cell phone and something else. And so when we talk about quality time, it means actually spending the time with the child, interacting with the child, not being distracted by things other than what.
And that screen time, too much of it is a problem. Is at birth to 3?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay, pick up your point, Shannon.
Well, it goes both ways, too, because a lot of times you see parents, and I'm guilty of this as well, who come home and they don't shut off the job. So the parents are on the phone just as much and not engaging with their child. Right. And how many times have my kids asked me a question and I'm doing this?
Well, it's not like I send you emails after work hours. I just want to clarify that. It's other people. Your friends bothering you.
It's my other boss.
Let's not go there. Okay. But we're distracted by our technology, our handheld devices, Carrie, and you work like crazy. How do you?
Well, I think what strikes me about this conversation is
we're
underscoring how it's not all or nothing, right? So as Beverly just said, we can do better incrementally, so we shouldn't be paralyzed by no screen time versus a ton of screen time.
But how do we know how much is too much?
Well, I think on the lower end to none is the better. But it's also about something that strikes me about the modeling. So while we're talking today, Joanna's bringing up, she might be distracted maybe she'd be less distracted if she understood the impact that screen time would have, because it would be more on your mind. Right. And then if you reduce your screen time, you're modeling that kind of engaged behavior for your children.
Even for a 2-year-old?
Absolutely.
Caitlin, you buy that?
Well, technically, under 2, the American Academy of Pediatrics will say no screen time at all. And if it's happening.
When?
Under 2, under age of 2.
No, 0, none.
That's
Who says that again?
The American Academy of Pediatrics.
And they're good, right, doctor?
So far.
However, what they recently came out with some new guidance that, the reality is kids are going to be on screens. That's how we learn. I can see my young children walked up to a television once and went like this because they wanted to see it bigger. Like, that's not what the television does necessarily yet. So when a child might be on the screen, if it's in an engaged relationship that you have with your child. What are you watching? Tell me about that My Little Pony. What happened today to Starfire? Making sure that you engage with them.
You know that character?
I have young kids. I have an 8-year-old too. Yes, so you engage what they're watching so that it becomes an engagement and it's not just this blank one-to-one, because there is a difference between quiet, which we all said, keeping your kids quiet. We see it at the restaurants, right?
That's right.
There's a difference between quiet and calm. And in fact, what happens when you watch a screen is you're not neurologically calm. You're actually neurologically excited.
Are you engaged?
Sometimes, eventually, your brain starts to stop and not be engaged. So what happens is, even if you have to use screens, we all know we make concessions. We talked about, we talk about moderation, and everybody has to do what they have to do, particularly for parents who do work 3-4 jobs sometimes overnight. Kids they need to sometimes be quiet, but we have to also know that when they're looking at that screen, if we engage them, that's going to kick their brain back in from being sort of overwhelmed and quiet to now moving into calm and engaged.
And
yet, I got you, Joyce, here.
And yet, one of the things that we also know is that even though I'm engaged with my child during screen time, that is not even as good as reading a book together. In terms of developing vocabulary, that engagement with screen time does not make nearly as much difference as if we were looking at a book together and talking about the book.
That a little bit. Talk about that a little bit. I'm fascinated by the reading of books to our kids, as we've tried. My wife Jennifer and I try to read as much as possible. I often, and I'm sure our kids are irritated, not just by that, by a lot of things that I do, but I'll stop and say, what does that word mean? And they just want to go right past it. They don't want to stop. But I'm thinking to myself, if we're reading this book together and you don't know what that word means, how would you know what this story is truly about? Is that part of our responsibility, as Doctor was saying before about vocabulary development, to stop, to say, what does that word mean, and then help teach? That's a pain in the neck to kids sometimes.
It is, but you're teaching them inquiry, you're teaching them to be curious, you're teaching them to ask questions, and that is a huge part of the learning process.
Okay, stay with us. I know there are more comments. This is Right from the Start, NJ. I'm Steve Adubato. I promise you this. More valuable tips, tools, advice for parents, for caregivers, because that's what this initiative is all about. We'll be right back.
To watch more One-on-One with Steve Adubato, find us online and follow us on social media.
I'm Steve Adubato. This is Right from the Start, NJ. Thank you for staying with us. Continue to check out our website for important information. And one of the areas that you'll see information on the website about really deals with advice to parents and who are stressed. And you were saying before, Carrie, that we need to talk about breaking that stress down. What do we really mean by that?
Well, tied back to the brain development
and the system. 3 or 4 jobs, et cetera. What does that mean?
It matters if the people in the environment, the people that kids are around and the environment they're in is one of constant unhealthy or toxic stress. That's hurting children. And unfortunately, we're not supporting families in the other areas of life so that they are working 3 and 4 jobs. And similarly, the child care providers we're here to talk about, in part, are probably among the lowest wage workers. So there's an inconsistency in how we're valuing
it's interesting. You used the word, the phrase toxic stress. And that phrase was used at the conference we did yesterday that Advocates for Children New Jersey held. And Dr. Arturo Brito from the Nicholson Foundation, who knows this stuff well, used the term toxic stress. And I was trying to figure out what's the difference between regular stress of doing what we do and toxic stress You want to take a shot?
Oh, yeah, an example of it, too.
Yeah, so we all have stress. Everyone has stress. The reason it becomes toxic is
And how, by the way, and how is it related to infants and toddlers? Go ahead.
Sure. So when we have a stress response, we have chemicals in our body that come up to get us ready to, if we see a threat, like we had a bear in the woods, we need to be ready for that. So we get our bodies ready for that. And then eventually the bear leaves and we calm down. But for people who are under stress consistently, those chemicals never have a chance to go away. And when they're in the body too long, they actually become toxic. Over time, they are actually reducing the life expectancy in our bodies.
How is that relevant to the caring of infants and toddlers?
Because of how important relationships are to infant and toddler brain development. And the reason relationships are important because kids don't know how to regulate their own emotions unless they're with a caregiver who helps them regulate. But if that caregiver is dysregulated consistently because of this stress in their bodies, it's harder for them to do that.
But Jennifer, you were saying as it relates to caregivers that the way they are trained, how do they deal with that? Because caregivers in child care centers must feel some of this really bad stress as well. Am I going to have it wrong?
Yeah, because a lot of the people who are caring for young children in centers and family child cares are among our lowest paid people. And as we talk all about right from the start, we know that this is the most important years.
Why are they paid so little, by the way?
Because society doesn't see it as a priority. Hopefully campaigns like this will start to show the public how important these years are. We pay third grade teachers much more than we pay this young. There was a recent article in the New York Times magazine about how the most important years, the teachers are being paid the lowest. We ask them to do things like ongoing assessment, like we talked about before, and have all these skills to be able to do it, but we don't pay them anything. So a lot of times what happens is we do all this great training, we give them this great training, they're great caregivers, but if they can't make ends meet in their own family, they move and they go into a completely different sector where they can make more money. And then the continuity of care, the relationships that these babies have formed with their caregivers goes out the window, and we have to find a new person and start
We were
all
talking
over
in our
again.
one-on-ones. By the way, we're doing one-on-one interviews with everyone here as part of the Right from the Start NJ series. I believe, I wasn't sure if it was you, Bonnie, or Joe, who mentioned this continuity of care issue. If a child care professional leaves because he or she says, I can't make a living with this, that has a direct impact. Joe, did you bring this up? Or, okay, good, Bonnie. And what impact does that have on the infant, on the 2-year-old, 3-year-old?
At the 0 to 3 stage, it is so important that a child feels safe, that the child feels secure, and that the child bonds with their caregiver. And every time there's turnover in staff, that breaks that bond, and that makes that child not feel so safe. And when those child's basic needs of safety are met, that's when the learning happens. But if they're feeling insecure, they're not learning and they're not growing.
So let's stay on this. This is not a series that simply talks about the problem. This is a series that attempts to propose some solutions, some remedies. What could and should the state of New Jersey, we have a new governor, as we do this program early in 2018, Governor Phil Murphy. And we believe he cares deeply about these issues. We believe some members of the legislature care deeply about these issues. How would they take that concern and care, Joe, and implement that in terms of real public policy that changes what, can you mandate what child care professionals are paid?
Well, we have mandated it through Abbott Supreme Court decisions, but I think that this is
makes
not
a reference to a state Supreme Court decision involving, I believe, 31, if I'm not mistaken, school districts disproportionately urban. And what does that have to? And the state funding that must go to those districts to attempt to equalize, if you will, based on the 1947 Constitution about education in the state. What does that have to do with 0 to 3?
So I think what we have seen is the impact of that investment in preschool, and has made a tremendous difference in moving kids along their development and making them kindergarten ready. What we've talked about here in the early years of life, where the care and attention is so important, so that by the time they're 3 years old, there's not a disadvantage already built in as well. So the same type of policy, or actually budget type of consideration. I think it's not just policy. Obviously, to implement policy, you got to put money behind it. So I think we're really talking about what is the budget allocation towards birth to 3, as well as towards preschool education. And we have to think of that, first of all, as an investment, but second of all, as a reallocation down the line, because there should be savings elsewhere that will replace that investment down the line.
What you're talking about specifically is potentially if infants and toddlers do not get the care they need in these first 3 years, there are higher rates, correct me if I'm wrong, there's higher rates of?
Health consequences, everything from
special education.
Yeah, diabetes and heart disease, behavioral health, addiction.
Doctor, pick it up from there.
Child Protective Services.
Say it again?
I said Child Protective Services.
What do they have to do with it?
Again, if you have behavioral issues, they end up very often in Child Protective Services.
Are you going to say corrections at some
And
point?
eventually criminal justice system.
In jails?
In jails.
Oh, okay, so
30 to 50,000 a year.
There's a 93% reduced likelihood of ending up in foster care if children are in a comprehensive program like Early Head Start or Head Start. There's a 93% reduction in the likelihood that children will end up in foster care if they're in a comprehensive program such as Early Head Start and Head Start.
Okay, this is an interesting policy question, but it's not just a governmental policy question. Paid family leave. Paid family leave. By the way, go on our website right from the start on Jay. There's a whole lot of information about this thing called paid family leave. What is it? And why does it matter in terms of infants and toddlers? Who wants to take a shot at paid family leave? So a woman has a child. She works for our company. Now, the state law says exactly how many weeks do you get?
So you're legally entitled to be out of work for the 12 weeks, but as was pointed out, any earnings during the time you're out will not be equivalent to your wages. It's a percentage of the wage.
Yeah.
So a lot of families can't afford that.
Yeah.
So Joanna, help us on this, because with your 2 children, you made decisions that are right for you. All of our other producers who are great and behind the scenes at Right from the Start and Jay and the CAUCUS Educational Corporation, they make this happen. Virtually every one of our staff people, producers, happens to be women. Our great production team. You're looking at me, guys. I know there are a lot of men here too, but we're all involved in the lives of children. You had to make those decisions as to when you came back, if you came back.
Right.
Economics mattered big time, right?
They do, and I can tell you, each child is different and the needs are different. I can't imagine having to come back to work after 6 weeks, and I felt that way after my daughter, who had a very healthy delivery.
Folks who didn't catch Joanne has a 4-year-old daughter, 2-year-old son. Go ahead.
That's right. So I had a wonderful delivery with my daughter. She was a healthy little girl. It was a bit more challenging with my son, and I remember at this 6-week mark, realizing we had no schedule. He was still underweight. He still needed me very much. And I thought, if I were a mom who had to go back to work right now, for one, I could not function in my day-to-day job, both emotionally, physically. I was exhausted, still up all night. And I think about those moms who now have to go and keep a job, maybe 2. The stress that Carrie was talking about on the mom, and then that.
Is it toxic?
Well, you know, I'm not a medical professional, but I could imagine.
Did it feel that way?
Yes, it would certainly feel that way.
So for the business community, what is the role of the business community in this, Beverly? I know that's important to you.
Well,
what can and should they be doing?
Well, there are a number of things they can do. One, they can provide lunchtime resources for parents that they employ.
What do you mean?
It could be workshops on parenting skills. It could be information about resources that are available to families in the community. There are a number of things that businesses can do. But the other challenge that I would say to businesses, we need champions. We need people that care about families and children in our business industry so that they can begin to share that information with others. So let me just give you an example.
Got a minute left, go ahead.
I'm in Newark, and we have a number of new employers coming to town. They hire someone, and that person now needs childcare. They rush over to our agency, Programs for Parents. They complete the subsidy application, and they're out looking. But they only have a very short window, and we need information from that prospective employer. So we need to educate the employers about, okay, you're hiring entry-level people. Let us come over and share with you what needs to happen and how you can help support your employees to make sure that they thrive.
Doctor, can you do this? Yes. Can we pick it up? We're going to pick up with Dr. Spratt, who's been with us for more years than you want to admit, but 20 years plus. Every time he's with us, every time we learn something new, we're learning something new from everyone here. This is Right from the Start. And Jay, make sure you not just go to the website, but pick us up in part 3 of the 3-part forum. It matters to all of us, particularly those of us who care so much about infants and toddlers. Catch you next time.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the CAUCUS Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence. Funding for this edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been provided by the TURRELL Fund, the Nicholson Foundation, the PNC Foundation, RWJ Barnabas Health, the New Jersey Education Association, the Northward Center, and by NJ Best. Promotional support provided by NJ.com, Small News, Big News, True Jersey, and by New Jersey Family Magazine and NJFamily.com. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area.
Education begins at birth. The brain develops most rapidly from birth to age 3, when critical skills are developed. Parents are the first and best teachers for their children, but for those like me who work, finding quality, affordable childcare can be challenging. But children have the greatest opportunities for success when they learn and have positive interactions with their caregivers. Because learning doesn't start in the classroom, it starts in the cradle.